The morning of George's funeral was colder than expected for October in Ohio. The maple trees outside the chapel were glowing amber, the kind of color that once reminded me of George's eyes when he laughed. But George wasn't laughing anymore. He had been gone for 2 weeks, and every hour since felt like walking through silence. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the black dress I had bought just for that day. Not because I didn't have black dresses, but because the others held memories of happier times. Anniversaries, dinners, parties. This one was different, cold. Like the grief I was supposed to show in front of people who came more to judge than mourn. The house felt much too big without him. After 32 years together, every corner echoed his absence. We had 5 bedrooms, but it now felt like I was a marble rolling in an empty jar. Our children, Alexander, Daisy, and Gabriel, had barely come around during George's final days. They always had reasons. Jobs, families, too many things to manage. And I understood. I really did. I had raised them to be strong, independent, and successful. I just didn't realize that I had raised them to become strangers. At the funeral home, the air smelled of lilies and disinfectant. George lay in a mahogany casket we had chosen together years ago during one of those conversations couples have when they accept that death, someday, will come. He looked peaceful, younger, as if dying had erased the pain written across his face during the last months of cancer. I sat in the front row and checked my watch. 10 minutes until the service, and none of my children had arrived yet. The chapel was filling up with neighbors, co-workers, old friends, and people who had seen George work quietly and kindly his whole life. Then I heard Daisy's voice. I turned to see all 3 of them walking down the aisle like a carefully arranged photograph. Alexander in a sharp black suit, Daisy in heels that hit the floor with clipped confidence, Gabriel with his neat beard and the watch George gave him when he graduated. They looked perfect, like the results of years of hard work and sacrifice. Our sacrifice. When George and I could barely afford groceries, they had the best of everything. We went without so they could have more. Alexander leaned in and kissed my cheek. His cologne smelled expensive, sharp. "We need to talk after the service," he whispered. "About Dad's arrangements. About practical matters." I nodded, though something sank cold and heavy in my chest. They were just trying to be helpful, I told myself. Trying to take the burden off my shoulders. That's all. The service passed like a fog. A pastor who didn't know my husband trying to talk about a man who never made headlines but meant the world. People called him a good man. But George was more than good. He remembered every little detail. Our anniversaries, the kids' milestones, my favorite tea. He never forgot anything that mattered. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted to share memories, I expected one of them to stand up. They had stories, camping trips, pancake Sundays, soccer games, school plays. But none of them moved. Then Alexander stood, and Daisy and Gabriel followed, standing behind him like they'd practiced this. "Thank you all for being here," Alexander said into the microphone. His voice polished and strong. Our father was a man who believed in family, tradition, and building a legacy. My heart lifted slightly. Maybe they understood after all. But then the speech shifted. He wanted us to carry that legacy. The business, the investments, the properties. All of it will remain in the family. And our mother will be well taken care of from a distance. The words landed like glass shattering in my chest. From a distance. I felt the weight of every eye in the room turn toward me. Some confused, some uncomfortable, and some filled with pity. I sat still, twisting my wedding ring, feeling its edge dig into my skin. Not one of my children looked at me after that. Not during the pastor's closing words. Not when the guests gave their condolences. Not even when they walked past my seat to shake hands and accept sympathy. They didn't know what I knew. That I had helped George write his will. Every clause, every account, every possible outcome, including this one where our children forgot who we were. And as I looked at them standing together, so sure of their future, I remembered the last thing George told me before he died. "Some lessons, Lola," he whispered, "can only be learned the hard way." The week that followed the funeral was the longest 7 days of my life. Not because of grief. I had done my grieving in the quiet months before, sitting by George's side as cancer took him piece by piece. No, it was long because I was waiting. Waiting for my children to realize what they'd done. Waiting for them to remember who I was. But they didn't. Instead they made calls. Cold, strategic, calculated calls. Alexander was the first. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," he said in that same polished voice he used in corporate meetings. "The house is far too big now, and the upkeep, well, it's a lot for one person." I told him we'd discuss everything after the will reading. "We're just trying to make the transition easier," he replied. Transition. As if my life was a business they were restructuring. The next day Daisy called. Her tone was professional, her words rehearsed. "We found a lovely assisted living facility in Parma Heights. Very well rated. Safe." I reminded her I was 53, not 83. "Of course not now," she said quickly. "But Dad wanted us to plan for your future. For your security." There was that word again, security. Their favorite excuse. Gabriel's call stung the most. He spoke gently, almost apologetically. "Dad talked to us," he said. "He was worried about you being alone, financial stress. We promised him we'd take care of you." I asked what that meant exactly. "That you'd never have to worry," he said. Like I was an old dog they didn't want to put down, but couldn't bear to keep either. The morning of the will reading, I didn't wear black. I wore the navy dress George loved, the one he said made my eyes look like the ocean. I wore the pearl necklace he gave me for our 25th anniversary. I wasn't going to that office as a widow. I was going as George's partner. His equal in every way. The law office sat on the top floors of a sleek Cleveland tower. Glass everywhere. A view of the lake that looked cold and angry under the gray sky. I arrived early and they arrived together. Again, a united front. Alexander with his leather portfolio. Daisy with her legal pad. Gabriel looking like he hadn't slept. Their faces were composed, but I knew they were ready. Ready to assume control, to wrap up the estate quickly, to move forward. James Whitman, our lawyer for 15 years, entered the conference room with a thick folder. "Before we begin," he said, "this document represents George's final wishes, reviewed thoroughly and in accordance with state law. There's no ambiguity." Alexander nodded confidently. Daisy tapped her pen. Gabriel looked down. The reading began exactly as expected. The house, the business, the investments, all to the children, divided among the 3 of them. Alexander made a note. Daisy smiled slightly. It was all going to plan. Until it wasn't. "There are a few key conditions," James said. His tone shifted. "Harper. First, all assets are contingent on the continued care and support of Lola Jones, for the remainder of her natural life. This includes housing, medical care, and a monthly allowance of no less than $8,000. I watched the blood drain from Alexander's face. Daisy's pen froze mid-sentence. Gabriel blinked slowly, trying to process. But James wasn't done. "Second, if any of you fail in this obligation, or attempt to place Mrs. Jones in institutional care against her wishes, your share is forfeit. It will be donated to charity." A sound escaped Daisy. A small protest that died in her throat. "Third," James went on, "a separate trust fund of $500,000 has been established for Lola, with her as the sole trustee." The room went completely silent. I sat with my hands folded, my face calm. They were crumbling. "And finally," James said, pulling out a sealed envelope, "your father wrote a personal letter. He asked that it be read now." He opened it, unfolding the pages with care. George's handwriting covered the sheets. Firm, neat, precise. "If you are hearing this, it means I am gone," James read, "and you are beginning to learn the true terms of my will. I hope you are surprised. I hope you are shocked. And I hope you understand this isn't about money. It's about respect. It's about remembering the woman who helped build the life you now feel entitled to." The silence in that glass-walled room became heavy. Even the hum of the heating system sounded louder. I could feel the ground shifting beneath my children's feet. And I hadn't said a single word. James continued reading, his voice steady, though even he seemed to sense the weight of the moment. You probably think this is unfair, that your mother and I acted behind your backs. You're right. We did. We saw what you couldn't or wouldn't. That success had made you blind. That comfort had made you careless. That you had forgotten the hands that fed you. Alexander shifted in his chair. His confidence was cracking, his jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. Daisy looked like she wanted to speak, but her pen remained motionless in her hand. Gabriel kept his eyes on the table, shoulders hunched like a boy waiting for punishment. You think this is about punishing you, James read on. It's not. It's about giving you a chance to grow up, to finally understand the weight of your decisions. Your mother was the backbone of this family. She worked 2 jobs while going to school. She gave up promotions, delayed her own dreams. And when I became successful, she never once complained about being left behind. Alexander finally spoke. This can't be legal, he said, his voice cracking. Dad would never make changes like this without telling us. James didn't even look up from the letter. I knew you'd say that, he read. So we prepared. Every document has been reviewed. We have video testimony, independent witnesses, medical evaluations. I was fully competent when I signed this. There is nothing you can contest that hasn't already been addressed. Daisy leaned forward. When were these changes made? She asked, her tone clipped, her lawyer instincts battling her disbelief. He was on pain meds for weeks. August 15th, James said flatly. Your father had been off all medication for a full week. His doctor cleared him. We have 3 evaluations confirming his mental clarity. Would you like to see the documentation? She nodded stiffly. James passed the thick folder across the table. She opened it with trembling hands. Page after page confirmed the truth she didn't want to face. George had been of sound mind. He had meant every word. James cleared his throat. Your father continues, he said. This isn't just about testing you. It's about protecting her. She wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. She believed you would come around on your own. That the grief had clouded your judgment. But I knew better. I saw how you dismissed her. How you circled like vultures the moment my health began to decline. I saw your plans. I saw your distance. And I made sure that distance came with a cost. Gabriel spoke at last. How long do we have to do this? James didn't flinch. For the rest of her natural life. Every term in this will, your inheritance, your access to the business, your share of investments, depends on how you treat her. The support, the care, the respect, it's not optional. And most importantly, your mother decides if you're meeting the expectations. Her judgment is final. There is no appeal. The silence that followed was thicker than any grief. Alexander stared at me, something like fear flickering in his eyes. Mom, you're not actually going along with this, are you? I met his gaze. Clear. Your father and I were partners, Alexander. In every way. Did you really think he would make decisions about our life without including me? Daisy's voice sharpened. This is coercion. No, I replied. This is consequence. Gabriel looked at me, tears in his eyes. We didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. We were overwhelmed. You weren't overwhelmed, I said. You were calculating. You stood beside your father's coffin and treated me like an obstacle. James began distributing documents as the meeting came to an end. My children signed what they had to sign. Mechanically, silently, with the pale faces of people who had just watched their control vanish. As I rose to leave, Daisy made one last attempt. Mom, we should talk. As a family. Figure out how this will work. I picked up my purse, smoothed my dress, and looked her square in the eyes. You have my number. Call me when you've decided how you plan to make it right. And I walked out of that glass tower with my head held high, leaving behind not just my children, but every assumption they'd ever made about the woman who raised them, The first day after the will reading passed in complete silence. No calls, no visits, no emails filled with apologies or explanations. Just silence. And I let it stretch. I let them sit with it. I wanted them to feel the weight of everything they had assumed would come easy now hanging by a thread they could no longer control. While they stayed quiet, I worked. I sorted through George's files, reviewed the financial documents, highlighted every clause that mattered. I knew now that knowledge was my greatest weapon, and I intended to use it. On Sunday morning, right on time, my phone rang. It was a conference call. Alexander, Daisy, and Gabriel all on speaker. Their voices were stiff, overly polite. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today? Do you need anything? Is the house comfortable?" They asked the questions they thought they were supposed to ask. They hit the right notes, but there was no music behind the words. Sounded like customer service, not family. I answered each question calmly, thanked them, then ended the call after 5 minutes. That first Sunday set the tone for what was to come. For 3 months the calls continued. Every Sunday. Always the three of them. Always together. Always formal. They spoke like people being watched, and in a way they were. I was watching. Measuring. And when I was sure they believed they'd figured out the minimum required to keep their inheritance safe, I gave them their first real test. I called Alexander on a Tuesday morning. "I need help moving some filing cabinets in the basement," I said. "There might be some papers of your father's you'll want to see." There was a pause. "Can't you just hire someone? I've got a board meeting in an hour." "I could," I said, "but I thought this might be important to you." He showed up 30 minutes later, still in his suit. Annoyed. Rushed. The basement was cold, dusty, and filled with memories. I led him to the far corner, where 4 tall filing cabinets stood like tombstones. "These need to be moved. But first I want you to go through them. Make sure there's nothing in there that relates to the business." He spent 6 hours down there. 6 hours in his custom shoes, kneeling on concrete, sneezing through dust. He missed his board meeting. Missed client calls. Missed the chance to be important for one day in his own world. I watched from the stairs, silently, as he went through folder after folder. In the 3rd cabinet he found it, the original partnership agreement. A document that would have given him more control than the trust allowed. His face lit up, the first real spark I'd seen in him in months. "Mom, this is huge. Do you know what this means? I could restructure." "What did you just call it?" I asked quietly. He looked confused. "What? You said you could restructure. What exactly?" The realization dawned slowly. He had been about to say, "The entire company." "I just meant, maybe there are ways to improve things." "I'm sure you did." I took the document from his hands. "I'll have James review this." That night, the paper went into my safe. Along with others I'd quietly gathered. Insurance policies George never mentioned. Investment accounts Alexander hadn't discovered. Property deeds in towns they'd never heard of. Information is power. And I was building an empire of it. Daisy's turn came next. I called her office on a Friday afternoon. "I have a question about my homeowner's insurance," I said. "Some coverage issue." "Mom, I don't do insurance law. You really should call someone. I'd prefer to keep it in the family. Unless you're too busy." She came that night, tired, her lawyer's briefcase in hand, her smile strained. We sat at the kitchen table for hours while she walked me through coverage options, deductibles, dispute procedures. After an hour she asked, "So what exactly happened? What are they denying?" "Oh, there's no claim," I said. "Not yet. I just wanted to understand my options." She stared at me, realizing what I'd done. She didn't argue. She just opened her laptop and started compiling a full analysis, 47 pages of it by the time the weekend ended. I printed it, filed it, and thanked her with a kiss on the cheek. She never brought it up again. Gabriel's test was the hardest. I waited until the anniversary of George's death. Then I called him, my voice quiet. "I just need some company tonight. I said. Could you come over? Maybe go through some photo albums. He came straight from his clinic, still in his scrubs, smelling faintly of animals and antiseptic. We sat in the living room with open boxes between us. Photos of birthdays, camping trips, school plays. We held the past in our hands. Remember this? I said, showing him a picture of him as a 5-year-old, holding a dinosaur lunchbox. You cried that morning. I thought everyone would make fun of me, he said, his voice trembling. But you told me anyone who didn't like dinosaurs wasn't worth knowing. And were they? He smiled. 3 other kids had dinosaur lunchboxes. We became best friends. He cried then. Quiet tears as he touched the photos. I'm sorry, Mom. I remember everything. I know I can't fix what we did, but I want you to know, I remember. I looked at him and felt nothing. No warmth. No forgiveness. No desire to comfort him. Do you know what I remember, Gabriel? He asked. I remember you standing silently next to your siblings while they offered to care for me from a distance. He flinched. I was scared. I didn't know how to fight them. Yes, I said. You were a coward. And with that, I closed the album in the moment, and I added his tears to the growing record of consequences. 6 months have passed since the will reading, and nothing has changed. And yet, everything has. My children have kept their promise, technically. The $8000 arrives in my account every month like clockwork. It comes from Alexander's business account. He's the only one with steady enough cash flow to cover it. Daisy transfers her portion quarterly, and I know from quiet whispers through old contacts that her budget is straining. Law school loans, a mortgage, and now a financial burden she never expected. Gabriel sold his house 2 months ago. Downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment. He told no one, but I found out. Find out everything now. Every Sunday they call, always together, always polite. It's like they're reading from a script. How are you feeling, Mom? Do you need anything? Are you eating well? The tone never changes. There's no affection in their voices, only the mechanical compliance of people who know failure comes with consequences. I answer their questions and let the silence stretch when their words dry up. They try to fill it with nervous laughter, with small talk that goes nowhere. I let them squirm. 3 months into their routine, I decided it was time for more than just watching. It was time to test, to see how much of their performance could hold under pressure. That's when I called Alexander about moving the filing cabinets. That's when I watched him sweat through 6 hours of work he hadn't done since he was a teenager. That's when I saw him find that partnership agreement and forget, so quickly, that it wasn't his company to command. He looked at me like I was the gatekeeper. 'Cause I was. Then Daisy. Then Gabriel. Each of them faced their own reckoning, shaped carefully by the very woman they once tried to push aside. And now I sit here again, in the same navy dress I wore the day James read George's letter aloud. I look into this camera and speak not because I want sympathy, but because I want truth to have a record. Because not all stories end in forgiveness. Not all betrayals deserve second chances. My children continue to live their lives around the structure they built with George's name, but my authority. They never speak of the funeral anymore. They never mention the moment they stood in front of a full chapel and demoted me to a burden to be managed. But I remember. I will always remember. Their calls continue. Their visits are scheduled, brief and strained. They show up with bakery bags, flowers and fake smiles. They say the right things, ask the right questions, and leave with hollow promises of next time. They've become performers in their own lives, acting out roles in a play they didn't audition for, but were cast in all the same. And I sit in the front row watching every move, every line. Because what they still don't understand is that this was never about the money. This was about exposing them. About showing them exactly who they were when they believed no one would hold them accountable. It was about proving that love, once dismissed and discarded, doesn't come back just because it's suddenly convenient. They failed. Not because they couldn't pay, but because they never really understood what they lost. The woman they humiliated in public. The mother they betrayed in private. The person they believed would quietly fade into the background. I didn't fade. I rose. Now they live with it. The guilt. The discomfort. The forced Sunday calls. The monthly payments that remind them every time that I am not someone to be handled. I am someone to be reckoned with. Justice, it turns out, has a price. And watching them pay it month after month is worth every cent they've spent trying to buy back what they threw away. Sometimes I wonder what they say about me when I'm not on the call. If they vent to each other after they hang up, frustrated that I didn't smile, didn't thank them, didn't give them the emotional reassurance they once assumed would come automatically. Maybe they think I'm being unfair. Maybe they tell themselves they've changed, that they're doing everything right now. But that's the problem, they're still performing, still measuring everything in terms of effort and outcome, transaction and reward. As if love can be earned back with compliance. As if duty could replace what they destroyed. I gave them 3 months to prove me wrong. 3 months of silence on my end. 3 months of observation on theirs. And then I tested them. And they failed. Not because they didn't show up, but because of why they showed up. Out of obligation. Out of fear. Out of financial self-preservation. Think about George often. He knew our children better than I wanted to admit. He saw their sharp edges long before I did. He once told me, "We can't control who they become, but we can control what they inherit." At the time I thought it was harsh. Now I understand it was the most loving act he could have done for me. He gave me protection disguised as power. He gave me the right to demand not just care but dignity. And they still don't fully grasp that. They think if they do just enough, I'll forgive. That I'll fold. That one day I'll smile and say, "It's all in the past." But I won't. Because I remember the exact moment they showed me who they were. Not with words but with silence. With the absence of protest when I was being publicly discarded. With the convenience of their unity when it was easiest to stay silent. I see it in their eyes now, each time they visit. They don't know what I'm thinking, and that unsettles them. They want a checklist. They want rules. They want to treat my forgiveness like another legal clause they can meet. But what they want most is control, and that's the one thing they no longer have. Last week, Daisy brought over documents. A spreadsheet outlining expenses, a proposal to automate future care arrangements, even a breakdown of how tasks could be divided more efficiently. She called it a long-term strategy. I read it while sipping tea and said nothing. Efficiency had always been her language. Cold, precise, impersonal. She doesn't understand that my silence isn't a negotiation tactic. It's a boundary. Gabriel visits the most. Quiet, hesitant, always trying to do something helpful. Mow the lawn, fix the fence, bring groceries I didn't ask for. I think a part of him still hopes I'll hug him the way I used to. But I don't. Not because I hate him but because the damage is done. He cries sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking. And maybe, out of all of them, he's the one who almost gets it. Alexander has grown more restless. The weight of responsibility is dragging on him. The business, the payments, the performance. It's all bleeding into his carefully polished life. I can see it wearing him down, and I don't feel sorry. Not even a little. He's starting to realize that this isn't something he can schedule around. That this isn't a deal he can renegotiate. They've come to fear the power of my silence, because it reminds them that I no longer need them. That I never really did. I was their foundation. And now I am the measure by which they are judged. Daily, quietly, completely. They tried to manage me from a distance. Now they manage their guilt up close. And I make sure they never forget that I didn't ask for this reckoning. They brought it on themselves. It's remarkable how fast people can go from confident to careful. From dismissive to dutiful. In just a few weeks, my children went from assuming I'd quietly fade into the background to tiptoeing around every word they spoke to me. Every Sunday call, every visit, every gesture, they all carried the same weight now. Fear. Not of me exactly, but of what I represented. Mirror. Memory. Consequence. Alexander has started sending gifts. Not expensive ones, he's smarter than that. He sends framed photos of George, old family memories. tokens meant to look thoughtful. I unwrap them and place them quietly in the guest room, where they collect dust. He once asked if I'd gotten the last one. Yes, I said. It was very well packaged. That's all. I didn't thank him. I didn't hang it. Let him wonder what it meant. Daisy, ever the strategist, began calling midweek too, checking in more often, offering legal advice I didn't request. She even tried to bring up my will once. Asked gently if I'd ever thought about updating it, just to be aligned with my long-term goals. I looked at her, held her gaze, and said, "My goals were met the moment your father signed his." She didn't bring it up again. Gabriel, he still tries the hardest. He shows up with food, sometimes with his girlfriend, always quiet and anxious. He doesn't know how to undo what's been done, and the truth is he can't. No one can. That's the point. Forgiveness isn't something I owe them. Especially not when their repentance is rooted in fear of loss, not in love. The longer this goes on, the more they begin to understand that they're not being tested anymore. This isn't about meeting conditions. This is the new reality. A lifetime of proving they are worthy of what they nearly threw away without a second thought. There's a look they give each other now when I'm around. A silent agreement. A sort of unspoken plan. They try to show unity, but I see the cracks. I hear it in the pauses, in the shifting glances, in the way Daisy sighs when Gabriel speaks too emotionally, or the way Alexander's jaw tightens when Daisy offers an unsolicited suggestion. The unity that once gave them power now weighs them down. It binds them together in an obligation they chose, but never expected to cost so much. They don't understand that I'm not keeping score, I'm keeping records. The difference is subtle, but devastating. Scorekeeping implies an endgame, a winner. But this is legacy. And legacy is permanent. George knew that. He knew exactly what he was doing. When he gave me the power, he also gave me clarity. He gave me the right to define the terms of my respect, not ask for it. He gave me the space to enforce the value of a life that had been quietly, consistently, selflessly poured into others, and almost discarded in return. Now, my children live in a world they helped create. One where love can no longer be assumed. Where inheritance comes with oversight. Where the woman they once tried to set aside is now the one person who holds the keys to everything they care about. They have learned how expensive it is to lose trust. How costly it is to underestimate the person who made their lives possible. And they have learned too late that distance, once chosen, can become permanent. Not in miles, but in meaning. 6 months after George's will was read, I sat once again at his desk, the same one where we made every major decision together, and I watched the calendar turn to another new month. The automatic transfer hit my account right on time, down to the minute. $8000, wired from Alexander's firm. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. Just clarity. The system we built worked. Not because it inspired love, but because it enforced memory. They hadn't missed a payment. Not once. Not since the moment they realized everything they took for granted could be taken away. And while they stayed compliant, I stayed watchful. I read every bank notification, noted every visit, measured every conversation. Not with emotion, but with calculation. That's what they'd taught me after all. How to remove feeling from function. How to treat loyalty like a budget line. Now I applied their lessons better than they ever imagined I could. Alexander's calls had grown shorter, less eager. I could hear it in his voice, the fatigue, the tightness in his throat when he asked how I was. He had started using his assistant to confirm visits, no longer texting me himself. A slow retreat cloaked in efficiency. Daisy's voice, once crisp and professional, had developed an edge. She no longer asked how I was. She asked what I needed. As if this were a job role. A checklist to be completed so she could say she did her part. She no longer lingered on calls. She never stayed for coffee after her visits. Gabriel still came alone, without warning, sometimes in silence. He sat on the porch, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the trees. I let him stay, said little. Offered tea and a blanket if it was cold. He didn't cry anymore. But he also didn't smile. And so life continued, shaped by the weight of their guilt and the structure of George's design. What they hadn't realized when they signed those documents was that they were stepping into a contract far heavier than any they'd ever negotiated in courtrooms or boardrooms. It wasn't legal obligation that bound them to me now. It was the irreversible truth of who they'd become when they thought no one was watching. I didn't punish them. I didn't speak harsh words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. My silence did more than any judgment could. Because when love is lost, there's no argument that can restore it. And when respect is broken, no apology can fully mend the fracture. They lived now in the hollow echo of what they had destroyed, a relationship built over decades, discarded in seconds with one sentence spoken at a funeral. They thought they were managing a situation. What they didn't understand was that they were being reshaped by it. Every action they took now wasn't theirs. It was George's. His plan. His message. His protection for me long after he was gone. And so, I wore my power quietly. I hosted them with grace. I listened to their rehearsed concern. I accepted their offerings. But I never softened. Not because I couldn't, but because they had shown me that softness was a luxury I could no longer afford. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals leave scars too deep for comfort to reach. And some people, no matter how well they perform, will never again be trusted with your heart. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like a mother who smiles politely while her children realize, month by month, that her silence is louder than their guilt and her distance more powerful than their regret.